Welcome to the Teacher Career Coach podcast with your new host, Elizabeth Sudo. She started her teaching career in 2014. She found she needed a career change after all the changes the pandemic brought to the teaching world. So she transitioned outside of the classroom into an administrative assistant role and now works as an operations manager for a tech startup. Get ready for discussions on all things related to teacher transitions, interview prep, addressing burnout in the classroom, and so much more. Here's your host, Elizabeth Sudo. Welcome back to the Teacher Career Coach podcast. You can find us on all your social channels at Teacher Career Coach or on our website, teachercareercoach.com.
Hi, and welcome back to the next episode. Today, we have the pleasure of speaking with Catherine. And Catherine taught English Lit for 8 years, and her specialty was teaching AP Lit and composition with an emphasis on poetry. In 2022, she transitioned out of education into a sales role. She's currently a senior manager of business development. Today, we dissect what quotas are, OTE, meeting your goals as a sales professional, and more. So join us today for this great episode. I hope you enjoy it. Welcome back to the Teacher Career Coach podcast. I'm your host, Elizabeth, and today we're very excited to have Catherine with us. Welcome, Catherine.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. I'm honored to have been invited.
Oh, well, I'm so excited that you're here today and excited for everyone to learn about your career journey. And we'd love to hear a bit about what got you into education in the first place.
Yeah, so I think that my degrees in undergrad were English literature and classical history. And I did those two subject areas just out of pure passion, but I never thought I wanted to actually be like a high school English teacher. And so after I graduated, I kind of bounced around in a couple different jobs. Like I worked at an independent bookstore and a bakery, and I did the restaurant thing. And then I moved to Washington, D.C., and I was managing a real estate office, which is really random, right? Like not related to anything I was like trained to do. And in my free time, I was teaching like illiterate adults with a nonprofit called Literacy Volunteers and Advocates. So taking like a personal inventory, realizing that I was spending my free time teaching kind of impelled me to just go ahead and go back and do it as a job, as a career. So that's when I came back to UGA. Well, I also had gotten married to my husband, and we were kind of doing the long distance thing. He was in Athens and I was in DC. So we got married. I came back to Athens, enrolled at UGA, and then that was it. I sort of just was like, well, I feel like there's obviously a passion here. There's obviously a desire. And so I just went for it. Yeah.
That's so cool that you found it by exploring all those different careers. And I can totally see you working in the bookshop because I see all your bookshelves behind you.
Yeah, we have nice rival bookshelves.
Thank you. And so what did you end up teaching? For how long? Was it public or private?
Yeah, sure. My master's was in secondary English education, so very specific. I knew I wanted to teach literature because that's my jam. Yeah, and so I did that program. It was 2 years. I did the student teaching thing, and then the first job I got out of graduate school was at a private independent school in Athens. It was a STEAM school, so it was kind of a startup school. It was really interesting, a little chaotic, but ultimately, like, I was one of like 2 or 3 teachers. There were 40 kids in the school, and it was just kind of an experimental independent school. So the whole goal was to teach like integrated thematic curriculums. So for instance, if we were studying in science class, studying like the oceans, we would do something related to that. In literature, do art projects related, and it was all very exciting and cool and creative and engaging for students. But there were just some like misalignments there at the end of the day. So after 2 years teaching there, I switched over to public school. And that's when I just did the 9th grade to 12th grade literature. I got certified to do honors. I got certified to teach AP literature, which was just like the best class ever. That was my favorite. So I did that for 4 or 5 years. I think like all told, including grad school, I was in it for like a decade, maybe a little bit less, but I did it for about 10 years, which is a long run. But it was kind of crazy to close that chapter just because it felt like I had invested so much time because I had. Yeah.
And what was the point where you decided that it was time to close the chapter?
Yeah, I mean, actually, there was a few moments. I was just feeling really burnt out around like my third year in public school. And I taught at a Title I institution and I loved my students, but just the general dynamics of education, which I think a lot of teachers can relate to, were really frustrating and it was sort of exhausting. And so I actually like declined to renew my contract that February. I was in New York with some family and I was like, I think I'm going to quit teaching. I don't really know what I'm going to do yet, but I have all this time to figure it out. Like I have months because I would get paid through August and I'm just going to like hold myself accountable by not being able to fall back into this role. I'm just going to just decline. And then 2 weeks later, the entire world shut down with COVID. And I was like, oh my God, what have I done? It was like, I want to just be unemployed, like no one's hiring. And so honestly, my principal contacted me and was like, would you consider renewing and just coming back? And I was like, sure, for continuity's sake, for the students. But it was really like just so lucky because I was sweating. I was like, I don't know how to switch careers when there's so much global chaos. So I ended up staying on for 2 more years. Like I did the COVID teaching, which was mayhem. Like we did,
Okay.
half the students were at home, half were in person. It was just, and then I got pregnant and I had a baby. And so I taught another year with Magnolia and she was the light of my life and I was not seeing her enough. Like I was leaving before she woke up in the morning. So that ultimately was like the push. I think having children just makes you rethink every single aspect of your life. And I was like, I'm just going to have to do this now because I want my life to look really different for my family. So that's when I kind of just started doing research. I found Aspireship, which I think probably your audience knows about. If they don't, I can kind of recap it. But yeah, I found Aspireship on this podcast as I was driving to another school to interview because I was like, well, if I have to teach another year, what if I'm not successful in transitioning? I'll just go to a school that's closer to my house. I was driving to this interview, which ultimately I nailed. Like it was awesome. And they offered me the job, which I accepted. But then I completed Aspireship and was doing those interviews and landed a position. So ultimately I had to tell them in early summer that I wasn't going to be working there and that I was going to transition out. So yeah.
Wow, that's the timing of that, like right when you were thinking about leaving in February, then COVID hitting, and then, teaching longer to, stay employed. And then I just love hearing too about the family aspect. And, once you have your family, it really shifted gears for you. And I'm curious to know, so you were listening to the podcast and you found Aspireship. So what made you think sales? Like with the different courses, how did you narrow it down to sales? Because you initially went into a BDR, business development role, and we'll get into the nitty-gritty of all that in a bit, but curious about your journey, how you narrowed it down.
Yeah, that's a really great question. And, honestly, it's kind of hard to say how exactly I narrowed it down, other than, my degree was so specific. And I was like, I can't go back and get another degree in something else. And I just want to do something that will use my skills. Like I'm so extroverted. I'm really organized. I'm a people person. I need to be in sort of like a client facing role. And to me, that just was like, it sounds like that's what sales is. And I was like, I bet I could be good at that. And so I kind of just tried it. And I said to myself, like I'm not really losing any like money on this. Like I'm investing my time, but ultimately if I don't like sales, I don't have to do it forever. Like you just don't have to do anything forever. But whatever this path is, it'll be a stepping stone to whatever I do long term. So I really had that mindset of like, I'm just going to see if I like this because definitely will like it more than teaching. Like it's going to change my life in the way I need it to change in terms of just like work-life balance, in terms of like salary, all the things. And regardless, I'm going to learn so much and I'm going to meet so many people. So if ultimately I don't want to be in a sales role, I can always figure out what would be next, which is great. I still feel I might not be in sales forever, but I'm enjoying it now and I'm really loving meeting people and like having teams that are supportive and just I don't know, it's been a dream, honestly. It's not perfect by any means. Like, the economy is still really hard. I was impacted by layoffs, which was sad and just sad. It was just upsetting. But there's always other opportunities because if you're like a smart, nice person, people want you to work for their companies like they do. So
That is such an important mindset, I think, knowing that if you get into something, you don't have to do it forever. And then just also looking at it as a stepping stone. You're getting your foot in the door, also learning so many valuable skills during this time. Being in a sales role, if you ever were to pivot again, you have such a strong foundation. Like every company has sales departments. And so you're really, yeah.
exactly. And like it's so versatile because I ended up in the market research industry, which also is quite random. I didn't know anything about it, but come to find out it's really interesting. So when I got laid off from that company, I was like, well, I know I want to be in market research, but what if I didn't like market research? I could go into any other industry and use the exact same skill set. So it just felt really versatile. And that was a huge comfort for me. Like I did the opposite of what I did with graduate school, where I did something that was so niche and specific. And I can't use that degree necessarily, but the skills of sales are all the same. And honestly, the skills of being a teacher are a lot like being in sales. So maybe I wasn't as pigeonholed as I thought I was. But when I was teaching, I certainly felt like, God, I have this degree and what am I going to do? Like it's overwhelming to have every option imaginable and not know what you're truly cut out for. So
And so you landed initially in a business development role, and then you went into an account executive role, and now you're senior manager of business development.
yeah.
So we'd love, before we kind of get into where you are now, for our audience who's curious about sales, there are some differences between what a BDR does, what an account executive does. Could you kind of break down the differences? And I know it looks different from company to company, but in your experience, what were some of the differences between those two sales roles?
Yeah, sure. So like BDRs basically are just, I mean, at my company, we were really just tasked with prospecting out to new clients. And so that was booking meetings, it was managing marketing qualified leads, maybe doing some like light discovery calls, but really you're partnered with an account executive. And so your support, like, say I was one of the account executives I was partnered with focused on like software and advertising and marketing as industries. So I would do all my prospecting in those industries. I would manage all the MQLs, the marketing qualified leads that would come in for him and just kind of be scheduling meetings like crazy. And that's like what my commission was based on. Like I had goals of booking 10 meetings per week, which, that happened a lot of the time and sometimes it didn't happen. But as long as you're doing everything you can to be trying to hit that goal, people are pretty happy with you. Yeah. And then so when you move into an AE position, you still have to do outreach. Like you have to prospect regardless of the role you're in. You just have a whole lot more to manage. So you're doing discovery calls, you're presenting proposals, you're basically seeing deals from beginning to end and then transitioning them to wherever they need to go. For instance, at my company, it's market research. So we sell a service. We sell market research as a service. So once you sell a project, you kind of kick that over to the delivery team. You have to work very cross-functionally with everyone. At the company I was at originally, when I became an account executive, we basically would win a project and then kick the account over to a development team. So it was very much like new logo acquisition. Whereas the company I'm at now, I'm still bringing on new clients, but I also get to manage those accounts through like the second or third project we run. So that could be like, 12 to 24 months, which is nice because for me, like I'm such a relationship person and it means a lot to me and my job satisfaction to like be developing relationships with these people before I just hand them over to the development side. So, but I know that looks really different at a lot of different companies. Some account executives, they do a lot more account management. Some is just new logo acquisition. So it really like read those job descriptions because like when I read the job description for the role I'm in now, I was like, wow, this sounds like exactly up my alley. I have all the experience necessary to do this, but I also get to grow my own skill set of management, which is like what I really wanted to do. So having that kind of like insight into the roles, I think that helped me really nail the interviews too, because I really did know what I was talking about in terms of like bringing in new clients, but then my eagerness to kind of better myself in terms of account management. I think they really liked that. So, yeah.
Oh, how cool. Well, in terms of prospecting, for those who are new to sales, you mentioned kind of whatever role you're in, that's going to be involved in some level. So, what does it look like for those who are totally new to prospecting? How do you even know where to start and find your target audience and market?
Yeah, like most companies, the marketing team, your sales leader, they'll give you a lot of guidance. And I certainly had a lot of guidance and training. Like I could never have just walked into that role and known like how companies in manufacturing versus software versus advertising and marketing utilize market research and how I could compel them to like take a meeting to explore us as a partner. Because that's ultimately what we do. It's like, hey, if you don't have your own research department, like, how are you getting insights to figure out your go to market strategy or all sorts of things. So yeah, it really was just like doing a lot of research based on recommendations that like my leadership team made and figuring out like, do I understand our company's value proposition? Yes. And now how can I connect that value proposition to what I know this company would need? And that's the whole thing. You have to compel them to take a meeting with you, which is really hard, So like when I was having success writing like hyper targeted, like I'd find a person at a company and be like, you are the person who is a decision maker. I identify that you need our services. Like, what am I going to say to this person to get them to take a meeting? And this is like emailing them, calling them, reaching out to them on LinkedIn. It's like a variety of touch points. And when we would have these successes, people would freak out. It's like, wow, you did it. Because it's hard. But a lot of it also is like, people will come to us, like that we'll have marketing qualified leads that'll come to us. And so like just being on top of responding to those people within like an hour, just being super attentive, connecting them with the right people, and then listening really well if they do speak with you, listening well to make sure you understand what their needs are and just providing a good client experience in that regard, because that's what's ultimately going to convince them to work with you. So yeah.
That's a good challenge right there.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I thought, sometimes like, the BDR role, I think it can be a little bit grindy. I think there's not a person on the planet who would tell you that it's not grindy. But if you do that for a couple of months, then you can move up. And so that's what I did. It was like, I know I'm not going to do this forever. I think like after 5 months, I was approached about moving into an AE role. And I was like, great, I'm ready. Sounds wonderful.
Wow. So it does sound like as well there's opportunities for growth, like you mentioned, because you're already in a manager role all within a couple of years.
Yeah, exactly. And like companies want to invest in the people they hire. So if you're starting out as a BDR, which, you're like, oh, entry level, I'm in my 30s. I was kind of like, what am I doing? But, you kind of have to have the confidence that like they're hiring you and paying you a salary, hoping that like you're going to continue to add value for a long time beyond that. And companies, I mean, if companies don't want to promote from within, like, definitely ask those questions in interviews, like what are the growth opportunities? If it sounds like there aren't, then like don't go there. Just don't go there. The companies that I worked for, luckily, like I also had amazing mentors like Kelly Siddiqui and Jody Gilman Jones, like just amazing leadership that I could not have done it without them. So
That's so good to hear. And then tell us a little bit about what it looks like, because when people apply, let's say for a customer service job or human resources on the job description, it usually shows a base pay at the bottom or, yearly salary. So for sales, we often see base pay and OTE. What does that look like? And I know you touched on it earlier about what your goal was when you were a BDR with booking 10 meetings a week. So that's very interesting. We'd just love to hear a bit more about that. What does meeting your goal and quota look like? If you could expand.
Yeah, sure. So like I said, in the BDR role, the way it was structured at my company was basically like, here's your base salary. And then like, here's how you would earn commission. Like, here's the goal of number of meetings booked and how much you would get paid per meeting. And like, that gets paid out like the second paycheck of every month or something like that. And then for account executives, it just is like a higher base pay because it's a more senior role. And then commission, I think that it would just vary company to company completely. Like the first company I was at, it was a percentage of the sale, but also like the percentage varied based on like what kind of like where you were in hitting your quota for the quarter. So if you were hitting like 90% of your quota, you would get a higher percentage, which for me, who's a lit person, I was like, the math, I don't even understand. Like, what are you talking about? Like at the company I'm at now, it's really not based on these different bands of like hitting different percentages of your quota. You just get a percentage of the sale. So like the bigger the sale, like the higher the commission, basically. So yeah, that's kind of how that works. I don't think I've ever so far hit 100% quota like every single time, that's really hard to do. I think some people are like wizards and they can do that. But I think that also, if you're doing everything activity wise, if you're doing all the things you can to demonstrate that you're trying to hit these goals, people aren't going to be like, well, you're doing nothing. Like people are aware and there's a lot of visibility in terms of, and it's a remote job. So it's like good to know that like people are aware of what you're doing, even if you're not sitting in an office.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Does that answer the question? I feel like that maybe answered the question.
It did. And I was going to ask as well, like, is it based, your commissions, are they quarterly? And then as well, how do you wrap your mind around it? Do you like having that kind of added goal to where or is it stressful? What's it like just having that, out there?
Stressful for sure. So it's at the companies I've been at and where I am currently, it's not quarterly, it's basically monthly.
Okay.
But also like when a project is finished and invoiced, then that will be paid. So I guess in that way, it sort of depends on the scope of the project. Some projects are going to take 2 weeks and some bigger trackers are going to be months. So I think in market research, I think there's probably a lot of variability there. But yeah, it's commission. It's like, ooh, like it's so vague. I definitely base my life and budget around my base salary because it feels too crazy to be like, well, I can project that I'm going to make this, so therefore I can spend this. It's like, actually, that's not a good idea. I mean, some people will do what they want to do, but I'm like, okay, here's my, if I get any commission, then that's just extra. And it honestly goes in my savings account. I just like kind of put it away and then think about, well, what am I going to invest this in down the line? Like, maybe it's tuition for my daughter, or a vacation or whatever. So that's kind of how I think about it. How I was saying, I'm not sure sales is a forever career for me. I think that at a certain point, I'm not going to want like the burden of a quota. I just might not want a quota bearing job, but there are a lot of other things you can do within an organization. And I think that if you're honest about these things with your leadership, they will keep you in mind for opportunities that you think you would be a really good fit for that aren't necessarily like quota bearing. So yeah, I don't know how other people feel. I think some people are super motivated if you're like super competitive, which I am. Like I'm one of five. I'm highly competitive. I like to be really good at my job.
And it's so different too, carrying a quota opposed to like public school teaching salaries. You're going from this band to this band based on your years of experience. And so it
Yeah.
will change as well. Yeah.
No, I mean, and that's a thing that's also really funny. And I was just like, gosh, because I have a master's degree and even going into an entry level BDR role, I was still making more money baseline than what I made with a master's degree. And I was just like, man, this is why there's an exodus. It's hard to argue. I had a lot of guilt leaving teaching. I had a lot of I just had a lot of ambivalence. I was so relieved to get this job and kind of be doing this new thing. It was so exciting, but I also cried when I got this job because I felt like I was abandoning ship. Like people like me who are good teachers who have like such depth of knowledge in their content area should be teaching. Like, I feel like I should be teaching to this day, but I'm like, God, I can't physically do it anymore. I can't do it emotionally. Like, it just, and that's the thing I think that I wish people would talk about that more. It's like, it's a relief, but it's also such a grief, you know?
Thank you for sharing that. And I think that's so important as reasons why, financially, and it's not sustainable. Physically, when you have 34 plus kids in a class, or I know every district's different with how many kids you have in a class, but it's very exhausting. So it would be great if there were things they were doing to keep the teachers, because
Yeah. I remember we got a small raise and they were like, here's 2,000 more dollars or something. Like, I was like, what? Like, get away from me with this like raise. It just,
and
I
yeah.
could never have known. Like, I could never have known. I'm glad I did it. Like, I think that like teaching has shaped who I am and like it has shaped me ethically. Like, it's shaped me in so many ways. I would never trade that experience, but I'm really relieved like to not be doing it anymore, you know?
Can you talk to us a bit about, because it kind of just flows into this, your work-life balance now that post-teaching?
Yeah, I mean, I basically have a 9 to 5 job, and there are definitely some days where I have to work later. Like if I'm trying to get like a proposal out or like I need to meet with someone, I just have a ton of flexibility though. Like the first time when I started my new job and the first time my daughter like got sick, like I was loading her into the car to take her to daycare. She goes to a daycare like down the road from us and she barfed all over the car. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I have a team meeting like now. And I texted my manager and he was like, oh, well, just record it. You like take care of your child. And I was like, oh my God, like this is like as a teacher, I could never just be like, oh, I have to leave all of a sudden. Like you're putting such a burden on your department or like just whoever in the school can kind of fill it in sub. Like you can't just leave and like deal with your life. It's just crazy. It's amazing to have just actual like support. Like if I need to go to an open house or I need to go to a doctor or record a podcast, I'm just like, yeah, I'm going to do this for 45 minutes. I'll be back. They're like, great. Because people understand that you'll just get your work done. And there's a lot of trust and that feels great. And I'm home with my child reading at 8 o'clock in the morning instead of starting a class. And you can't really like overstate how valuable that is. Like I'm just getting so much more time. So definitely feels more balanced.
Oh, that's amazing. The flexibility, the trust, and just this time that is invaluable. So
It's valuable. And it's like she's only this little potato like once. And like every day she's just bigger and bigger. So I feel like I like it was hard to do that when in her first year. My husband has a very flexible job. He's a recording engineer. So he basically doesn't start work till like 11 a.m. He'll work later, but he spent all mornings with her. So it was lucky that we had that dynamic. But now it's like, oh, we can all just get up as a family and have breakfast and smush and read. And sometimes we go together to drop her off and get a coffee or a beignet. And it's just nice. It's just, yeah, I love it.
Oh, I'm so happy for you. That sounds lovely. And Before we let you go, I did want to kind of get into, now you're in a senior manager role. So how does that look different from the AE role that you were in? And what kind of things are you doing in it?
Yeah, I mean, it's really just it's a very similar role to the AE role. I think it's just like I'm not actually managing a team of people. This is just like, I think the management component of that title comes from like the account management component of it. So that's something I'm doing that's really different than my old company. Like I won a project last week, so I get to manage this company and like continue to like meet with them, bid on projects for them. And then after we win the third project, then I'll move them over to our development team. But that's just the main thing. Like I'm just doing a lot more like relationship management, which I think like that's such a strong suit for me. So I'm just so excited to be doing that because it can be hard just being like, okay, back to square one. Like, let's find new logos and bring them in. And then you immediately, they go off and you're like, oh, it was so hard to do, like, let me hold on to them for a bit. So, that's the big difference. Yeah, I feel very lucky, like, I never thought, like, I'd be applying to roles that were senior so soon. But that's the other thing, like, I met a ton of people when I was working at my first company. And so I had met like the CEO of the company I'm at currently. When I got laid off, I had reached out to her and was like, yeah, I'm no longer with XYZ. I'd love to join your team. And she's like, we'd love to have you if we have an opening. And then they did. And so just like being able to network and get into positions that are more senior than you think you're qualified for, like that to me is amazing. And then it's like I think like everyone has imposter syndrome.
Mm.
I hope I'm not the only one, but you just kind of have to remind yourself like these people put you through 4 rounds of interviews and they chose you. So you can do this and you deserve to be here.
Mhm.
I think that's a hard thing to wrap your head around because I feel I'm still so new, but I'm like, wait a minute. I know what I'm doing. I got this.
And it just kind of goes back to what you were saying about the power of relationships. Get your foot in the door. You know, People, if they like working with you, you're a hard worker, they will notice that, make note of that. So when there are these opportunities for growth, you are there and ready to advocate.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's been a wild ride. I hope to be with this company for the foreseeable future. Like I'm really loving it. My manager is hilarious and smart and great. I'm just like enjoying the ride.
What tips would you give to teachers who are looking to get into sales? Any actionable next steps to point them in the right direction?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like aspireship, like I could never have done it without them. And, I remember when I was doing aspireship, my husband was like, "Seems kind of fake. Like, what are you talking about?" And I was like, "I don't know. Like, this is not fake. Like that their business model is so cool. And they really are like their whole ethos is just like you people are smart. If you upskill them, they can do these jobs and we're going to train you and help you." And like that, I recommended aspireship to countless people. And you don't even have to do just sales. They've opened it up to like revenue operations. I think there's like a coding, like you can go on their website and just see so many different courses you can take because not everyone wants to do sales. You can do customer success. Like I learned so much. It gave me a language with which to interview. Like I could never, I feel maybe I could have, but I certainly wouldn't have felt confident if I hadn't taken those courses and just like learned about the basics and foundations of sales. It just changed everything for me. Like before I was like, well, I guess I'll just apply for jobs and like shoot resumes off into the ether. It's like that's a really hard way of going about it. So I think if you can find a company like Aspireship that's going to help facilitate that for sure.
Thank you for sharing that and for saying those kind words. And before we wrap up, we love to kind of end with this question. What did you learn about yourself during this career journey and transition?
Oh God, I used to think that I was a super confident person, and even like my parents were like, "Yeah, they're always like, you went to Immaculate Heart High School and you came out of there so confident, sort of liberal, but like so confident." They really like credit like the high school I went to. as giving me this gift of confidence. And I am in so many ways. But then I learned like I'm actually sort of insecure. And that's not a bad thing to realize about yourself. I think like, I've had to kind of do a lot of like personal work and like, I talk to a therapist and like I realized that I am not like the strong pillar all the time, but I need support and I know how to ask for it. And I'm just not afraid to ask for help, which I feel like before I kind of was. Yeah, I think that's the main thing. Also, that like if I don't know how to do something and just try really hard to do it anyway, like I can probably figure it out, which
Mhm.
is also like and that crosses over to other areas of your life. Like the other day, I was like, looking at this crochet kit that I was given as a gift, and it was like a new pattern. And I was like, I don't know how to do this. Like, God, like so frustrating. And I nearly put it down. And then I was like, wait a minute, I'm just going to watch a YouTube video and learn how to do this. And then I made a shawl. And I was like, great. Like, I can make a shawl. I can switch careers. I can do anything. Like, it sounds kind of silly, but, I just feel like, yeah, that's the way it is with me, I guess.
Oh, that's so good to hear. And that having that positive self-talk that's I need to have more of that. Like when I'm doing household projects, and should watch a YouTube video and be able to follow through because you're right. Like we're strong people. We can do it.
Yeah, and you know what? Like, I had my third interview for the role that I'm in now. I spoke with the co-founder of the company for an hour, and he was amazing. And he had done some teaching early in his career, like Teach for America, after getting a degree in biology. I was like, "Tell me everything about your life. Like, how are you in market research right now?" But he was like, "You know what? Like, teachers can do anything." And I was like, "Yes, we can." It's like people know that teachers are so valuable. So like don't be afraid to just like go for it.
Well, thank you for sharing your journey with us today and your story, Catherine. I loved learning from you, and I'm really excited for this episode to come out. And we appreciate you and can't wait to follow your career journey and see what's next for you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was a treat.